Hey people, it's Niall Stokey. I heard about this from DC Radical once, so I'd like to thank him. This is from Al Jazeera. Meet the one freeing Mauritania's slaves. In a country where slavery can be as much a psychological state as a physical one, Salimata Lam tackles it holistically. When I got off the plane at Nouakchott International Airport, I had just flown over miles and miles of the Sahara Desert, looking out of the airplane at window at so much endless time of sand dunes that the doom seemed to mine like white caps in an ocean. When I got off the plane at the Nouakchott International Airport, I was landing in a country wholly apart from the place from which I'd come. Mauritania in Western Africa is a cloistered kind of country, an Islamic republic with unpaid roads and street corner money changers. It's a country that only got its first working ATM in 2004, a country whose television and radio stations are entirely state-owned, a country where, according to UNESCO, 67% of adult females can neither read nor write. At the airport, I looked around and found that I was the only one there. Since I was there conducting research for my novel, whose female protagonist is an escaped slave who hails from the Mauritanian desert, I found myself wondering where this country's women were, and hoping to meet one who would offer me an insight into the place and its people. I soon discovered the woman I was looking for, Salimata Lam. Lam is a slave woman of average height and elegant movement. She was just on the day I met her in a powder blue molafa, a traditional dress of Mauritania. With her soft voice and beatific smile, she might best described as a presence. Lam is the national coordinator for SOS Esclaves, a Mauritanian association dedicated to fighting modern-day slavery. It is arguably the country's premier anti-slavery organization, founded in 1995 by Boubacar Ould Messouad, a dynamic former lawyer who is widely regarded as the grand pere of the abolitionist movement. But Lam is modest and says the commitment and trust in the correctness of what one is doing will always give you the courage to do and continue. Sarah Mahfouzen, the Africa Program Coordinator of Anti-Slavery International, who works with SOS Esclaves to combat slavery, is a little more forthcoming about just what it is Lam contributes. She is the backbone of Esclaves. She runs the project in a very quiet way behind the scenes. She's very committed to the victims and the work. We can never raise enough money for the salary she deserves, but she just carries on with all kinds of hours and making all sorts of personal sacrifices to do this work she believes in. Lam's passion for justice is an asset to a country with a higher prevalence of modern slavery than any other on the planet. According to the Walk Free Foundation's Global Slavery Index, Mauritania, with its population of just 3.8 million, has between 140,000 and 160,000 slaves. That's about 4% of the population, and it is, according to many organizations, including Lam's, a rather conservative estimate. They point to a figure closer to 15%. But slaves are hard to count in a country whose landscape is covered by the drought-wrung, ever-expanding Sahara, even as the slaves who perform the desert economy's most demanding work. When Lam introduces me to her recently escaped family slaves, I learn the young children in the family have been made to herd camels, an especially arduous job in a harsh climate. It isn't just the landscape that makes quantifying this problem so difficult. Owing to the cost-based nature of Mauritanian slavery, it also takes on a psychological element. Mauritanians tend to be born into vocations, and slave is one of them. No words feel necessary to describe a condition accepted by so many of those who are born into it, and slaves do not always really identify themselves as such. What is more, the Mauritanian government itself maintains a stance of quiet denial regarding the scourge that flourishes within its borders. In 1981, the government became the last in the world to abolish slavery, but the slave only did not become a punishable offense until 2007. In August of this year, thanks to the efforts of anti-slavery activists such as Lam, the country doubled the prison term for offenders from 10 to 20 years and criminalized 10 other forms of slavery, including forced marriage. Lam notes, however, that to date, only one slaveholder has been conclusively prosecuted for owning slaves in November 2011, after two boys, aged 10 and 12, escaped confinement and turned to the initiative for the resurgence of the abolitionist movement. The IRA directed the boys to SOS Esclaves, who took the case to court, and two boys were able to testify against the man who held them. It's not uncommon for slaves to hold what Mahfouzen calls a reverse loyalty to the masters who exert psychological as well as physical control over them, and the boy's mother actually testified on behalf of the slaveholder. Nonetheless, the slaveholder was convicted that December and served 4 months of a 2-year sentence before being released on bail, pending an appeal. That appeal has never taken place, so Anti-Slavery International is part of a coalition that plans to take the case to regional court. The boys are now under the care of SOS Esclaves, although their mother remains a slave. A handful of other cases have been brought to court and charged with lesser crimes, such as exploiting a minor or kidnapping, but not one of them seen any jail time, which stands in stark contrast to some of the anti-slavery activists. According to Lam, she and her colleagues are often followed by Mauritanian government operatives. In November 2014, three anti-slavery activists, Biramda Abid, Brahim Bilal Ramdan, and Dijbi Sao, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing it right, were convicted of membership in an unrecognized organization, taking part in an unauthorized assembly, failing to comply with police orders and resisting arrest. It's not the first time such high-profile activists have been arrested in a country with a history of detaining and intimidating anti-slavery campaigners. It's Ramadan when I visited, and the temperature in Nouakchott has risen to its typical summer high of somewhere around 43 degrees. Although I fasted through plenty of holy months since I converted to Islam some 20 years ago, the extreme heat is making me realize I may need water. But thankfully, when a lamb picks me up from the hotel to take me by taxi to the offices of esclaves, which are an unassuming white concrete building in a rather quiet part of the city, I quickly learn that she is exactly the kind of person who will offer water before I feel the need to ask for it. When the taxi driver asks the probing questions about my obvious foreignness, she tells him that I am a petite sœur, little sister, and having first graciously dismissed him, begins to explain the city of Nouakchott. She motions out the window at the passing donkey carts and the men on mopeds during her journey to the office, where she again offers water. She keeps my thick foreign blood well hydrated, and this is exactly her approach to combating slavery, kind and thoughtful yet powerful and effective. SOS Esclave, she explains, fights for the eradication of slavery through familial descent. We provide recourse for slaves and former slaves, and we raise community awareness about the laws against slavery and the rights of people under the laws. We may please the policymakers to improve the laws and application. We also provide legal assistance to victims seeking redress. But Lam, in her position at SOS Esclave, does so much more than that. She helps people holistically from the inside out. When we arrive at the SOS Esclave's offices, which are tucked away on a side street in the capital city, we find a man sweeping the entrance corridor. He dressed in a polo shirt and slacks with his serene smile and efficient movement seems quite possibly the happiest sweeper I've ever seen. He was a slave, Lamb tells me, head upstairs to her office. I am shocked that the man with the carefree aura who spent his lifetime untouched by tragedy was once a slave. As I spend the day in the SOS offices, I see him do many things. He empties the rubbish, runs errands, brings me more water. He is one of the many former slaves whose life has been transformed by the job training that Lamb coordinates. At SOS Esclaves, former slaves can learn to style hair, dye clothes, tailor, and cook. Such job training is essential in the caste-based Mauritanian economy, where former slaves find once that they've escaped, there's no competing in a job market where employment is so firmly bound to ancestry. Lamb's comprehensive approach to helping people transition from slavery to freedom seems entirely appropriate for someone who has long been about the business of assisting others. She enjoys what she called a very happy childhood in the village of Bogue, which is in the Bratna region of southern Mauritania, along the Senegal River, and says of her parents, paternal grandparents who housed and educated her, they made me what I am today. In 1968, Lam succeeded in entering her 6EM, the first year of secondary school in the French education system at the college de Joinville, and made the 317-kilometer north to Nouakchott to attend. It was a young student in Nouakchott that she canvassed for the movement National Democratique, which was founded in 1968 as a semi-clandestine organization with a left-wing agenda that opposed the domestic policies and former alignments of then-President Ould Dada. I learned the fight against social injustices then, she said. The years passed, but watching social disparities did not desensitize me. It was only in defense of human rights I could find my place despite the risks. She started her career teaching the blind and then moved on to other kinds of human rights work. Along the way, she had 4 children of her own, 2 sons and 2 daughters. When I ask her how she managed to balance career and family, she remains modest. Like so many women, she says, I simply try to fulfill my family responsibilities and work responsibilities, but one infringing on the other. In 2010, she was recruited for the post of National Coordinator of SOS Enclaves and happily accepted. The work, she says, put me in direct contact with family victims of slavery, particularly women and children who experience a lot of violence and deprivation. They need much accompaniment and support. Even if slavery is hard for the Mauritanian government to quantify and punish, it isn't invisible. It's everywhere you look if you know what you're looking for. It's there in the darker-skinned woman who sits outside beside a stove while a lighter-skinned family sits inside, finding themselves. It's in everything you hear if you know what to listen for. The young girl no older than 10 who hangs laundry on a roof all morning long and then go back inside, only to be heard screaming a few moments later as though she's being beaten. In the late afternoon, I am driven from the offices of SOS Esclaves to a tent on the outskirts of Nouakchott. There I meet a woman who has escaped slavery with her 8 children, some of whom were fathered by a master, all of whom are products of rape. One of the women's children, a sickly girl who looks to be around 6 or 7 years of one of my own children, collapses in a fit of coughing. All 8 of the children gather to sit on the tent's raffia-matted floor. Unlike my girls, they are perfectly still and perfectly quiet. I ask if I could take a photo, and they oblige. I close my eyes and hear the wind gathering the sand. I open my eyes and wonder, since there's obviously no plumbing and no outhouse, how they are bathing and when they go to the toilet. Lam had arranged for an English-speaking student from the University of Nouakchott to accompany me on the visit. And the happy, sweeping man has come along too. He starts speaking to me in Hassaniya Arabic, and the student begins translating. It turns out the happy sweeper is the escaped woman's brother. He shares their story. After his own escape, he begins searching for her, but the local government in her region claimed they had no record of her existence. Various emissaries from esclaves, including Boubacar and Mesouad himself, traveled north in search of the woman, but no one could find her in the vast network of dunes and scarps that make up the northern part of the country. Rural Mauritanians tend to be nomadic, and given the vast area that the search had to cover, no one would have been surprised if it had been abandoned, but the woman's brother persisted. When a woman's sister was eventually found, she was 8 months pregnant. She delivered her baby just after escaping in a city between the site of her rescue and Nouakchott. This baby, who is sleeping so profoundly as we speak, is the first in her family born outside of slavery. I ask if I can hold her, and as I do, I breathe deeply of her sweetness. As a black American, I'm not that many generations removed from slavery myself. To fight my gathering tears, I focus on the tiny gold earrings in her tiny, delicate ears, and I feel something for which there are no words in the English language. I feel that every slave in every place in all history felt when he or she saw their first child born free. After a time, it's overwhelming. The tide of my emotions takes such a physical form that I feel I might wake this dreaming baby. I hand her back to her mother, and I return to taking notes in my small moleskin notebook. Later, as I leave the offices, I ask Lam how I can help. Most important outside aid, she tells me, is advocacy for significant changes in policy direction. Write to your own State Department, I think to myself. Write to your senator. The work of activists and human rights defenders in Mauritania is a difficult job because one must do it all times. We who defend human rights are investing a lot, but faced with many obstacles on the ground. It remains very meaningful work, and there are always changes. There are no fewer slaves now, but there's all times a slave who becomes aware of his situation and dreams of another life of freedom and dignity, she continues. The sun sinks as I tell Lam goodbye and go on to spend one of the most beautiful evenings of my life at the Grand Home Soud, who is holding an iftar dinner in the courtyard of his residence. We are covered by a large version of one of his tents that are so customary here in Mauritania. It's cool white on his canvas outside, held up by steel columns to make it as expansive as a sail. Masouad and his wife offer course after course of delicious food, succulent vegetables, restorative bisap, chickens that fall off its bone. The guest list for the evening is pure kindness. My translator, his friend, a young female student from Mali, and others who work to communicate with me in French. After a day without food, I feel my body singing at what I've been served, but I feel my soul singing too for what I've been served is grace. I get on a plane the following day and fly back over that sea of high dunes. The moment I remember as a departure is my descent from Suad's SUV. The moment I waved him salams and told him over the traditional Mauritanian music he was playing in the tape deck that I wish esclaves all the fight in the world. I walked through the packed sands of the road and the gate to my hotel thinking about the work of Salimata Lam, and how she uses her kindness to assist slaves in transition from life in black and white to a life in technicolor. I leave Mauritania so much more peacefully than I arrived because I have now seen there is so much very power in the infinity of sand. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this. Please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. I'm going to leave this article in the description. Peace.